Oh, I had it. So I'm just smiling because I just hit the record button, and a voice in my ear told me in a very weird American robot way that it was starting. So anyway, so we're going to be starting. I've got on here a really textured paper. This is my most bobbly, most sort of like strong surface texture, because I think I want to try and get quite a lot of spread, interesting things to happen. I'm working vertically, as I tend to do. I'm not going to get it too wet. Again, we're going to see, I'm going to use the water sparingly to begin with. And we're going to be using those colours, I think, that we've taken from looking at the West African fabric. So we're going to be using red and kind of teal in combination. And then the pen work is going to bring the black line into it. So I like the those feeling of those sort of concentric circles. So we're going to start with some of those, and then we're going to add in some other shapes around it. So it's not going to all be concentric circles. So hopefully, as ever, we'll make a good start in the session, and probably the more detailed pen work you will be able to go away and work on in your spare time, or not spare time, in your art time, which you're going to make time for. Because, you know, as the advert says, you're definitely worth it. Right, so I'm going to start with a little bit of water into this corner. I want to put this sort of circular design into this bottom quadrant here. So I'm going to start by getting that area wet. This is quite a thick paper, so it takes a fair amount of water. Also takes a fair amount of effort to keep it on the board, because it likes to lift itself off. It's quite tough. So hopefully it will stay put enough for this exercise. So we're going to start with I've got a lovely bright red, and then we're going to do fantastic teal kind of layers around it. So I'm mixing up a relatively watery red to begin with. We can always come back and do extra colors on top, and extra layers to sort of really beef up my colors. I could have drawn concentric circles on here first with pencil, but I'm going to stick to hand drawn. I don't want it to be too geometric. So I'm going to start with a lovely red center. Just a single sort of spot. And again, I really am not worrying if it rains, if it dribbles and changes in that sort of way, because I love having those unexpected moments to work with. And I think that's what gives these pieces such individuality. So we'll see how we get on, see what drips and splats emerge. I also love it. You can see on the wet surface, it's just starting to bleed outwards. And I really love the softness of that edge. I want to keep that. So when I do my next sweep of color around it, which is going to be in the tealy turquoise color, I'm going to leave a margin, even if it's like a white band to begin with, because we can always come back and work on top of it if you want to, but I don't want to rush in and get very close to that, too close to it too soon. So now I'm going for a kind of teal color. If you don't have a paint that's exactly a kind of teal, what we're really looking for is a blue, but with a little hint of green in it. So I'm trying to find you want quite a nice turquoisey kind of blue, that sort of greeny blue edge already to begin with, and then you can add in a little bit more of the sort of, and again go for a bluey green, so like a pine green rather than anything with too much yellow in it. So then once I've got a sort of mix up color, I'm just going to take my brush round. I'm not going to worry if it overlaps to begin with. I'm just going to paint that round in a target, sort of like painting a target shape. Just to, and because I've just left that white margin around that red, I'm going to come quite close to red, but I don't want to destroy the softness of that edge. I'm going to keep it quite sort of soft. If you're not happy with that blue, if you want to make it a bit greener, you can always come back in and beef up the green or add extra green into your paint and do a second sweep around over the top, because watercolor does tend to dry pale. So we may want to go back and add in more definition and more strength of color as we go around. And again, look at this lovely spread that's happening. I'm hoping you're getting a similar effect like this by painting on the wet paper. And the bobblier your paper is, the more sort of like chance you've got for spread to happen. But again, we're now going to do another sort of target ring around here, but we're going to go back to the red. But I'm going to leave, again, I want to leave that sort of margin of spread and let it exist without painting on top of it at the moment. I don't want to go in and cover it up yet, because I'm not trying to paint an actual target. So I'm going to go in now with some red again. So we're going to go back round with some red, hoping that we get, this has come out, I'm using a slightly pinker tone of red. You can stick to the same one. I'm going to probably put some of the orangier red on top of that. but I'm just going to come around and just leaving that little margin so that it's got room to maneuver. And I'm quite enjoying this, the way this is sort of fading out here, actually. I think we might not do all the way around. We might just leave some of it with a slightly sort of ghosty, fadey kind of feel, because the watercolor is a different media. And I think you can take moments of inspiration from other sources and then kind of really make them your own. And I think as long as you're always happy to acknowledge where your ideas are coming from, then you sort of pay respect to the artists that have been before, and then respect them by doing something with their ideas and taking them on further. It's a bit like, Isaac Newton always saying how he was standing on the shoulders of giants. And this is kind of what we do whenever we create art. We're creating our own stage, but we're also always referencing all those people that have made art before us, right back down to the earliest sort of cave art, which I get so emotional about, sort of early cave paintings. I can actually be known to brought tears when I think about the amazingness of the very early sort of mark making. And a lot of the early mark making that we have on record of human beings uses these kind of concentric round and round patterns in this kind of way, which you might see as a target now. But that circular form is probably one of the oldest and most widely referenced basic geometric forms in artwork. And if you think about it, if you think that as a fingerprint in the middle and then a swirl of a finger going round and round, that is one of the most fundamental kind of human movements that have been used to create art. And that's just why we tend to respond to them, I feel. Right, so I'm going to do another blue coming around the outside. As also, if you want to think of it, it's starting to look a bit like one of Mr. Willy Wonka's incredible gobstoppers. Like it might be full of fantastic flavour. I think it's quite nice as well. Right, so again, I don't want to paint too close. I just, if there's some spread happening, I want to keep that going. I don't want it to just be sort of completely taken up and mixed together on the paper. When you're using watercolor, it's always a good idea to keep the color mixing mostly to the palette. So although you can layer colors on top of each other, what you want to try and avoid is trying to sort of mix colors on the paper as if it was a palette, because they just tend to get very muddy and confused, because you're working on the paper is an absorbent surface, so it tends to, as the name would suggest, absorb what's going on. And it's sort of like it's not giving you a pure color to work with, so it's much easier to get your color. And if you put your brush on and you decide it's not what you want, then you can always lift your brush off and start again. And if you're doing a very precise piece, you might want to have a piece of paper on the side, which you can kind of test your colors on before you go onto your main piece. But with these ones, this is much more about exploration, so we don't have to worry too much about that. Right, so I've got my blue kind of target in here, but now I want to take this blue background further across the page. So narrowly avoiding dipping my brush in my lemon squash, which I have here to drink, I'm going to get some more water onto the paper, and we're going to spread this sort of color now out into the rest of the canvas. Not the whole of it, but certainly into this corner, because I then want to bring in some of these sort of more like a leaf form into this side here, sort of working through the sort of design. And we can come back round, and I'm really liking some of these sort of dribbles and movements that are happening in here. So I want to soften the edge of this last ring so that it's not so much of a ring and much more about being part of the background, maybe just a hint that it was a sort of circular part of it. Then I want to get some red areas in, because I want them breaking through from the background so we can work on them later. So I'm going to swap brushes and go for a where's it hiding from me? I want to go from a rounder, softer brush. Here we go. And I'm going to add in some sort of red leaf shapes. Sort of, I call them leaf shapes, but I'm sort of seeing them as like those sort of, you remember we looked at the ones that had kind of overlapping points, certainly a kind of leaf-like point in them. So I'm going to, on fairly dry paper to begin with, I'm going to get these sort of shapes, and they're going to be breaking out of a blue background. So I'm going to start by getting them into place, and then we'll work the background around them. So they're kind of all part of it. So we've got this area of with the target here, and then we've got these overlapping shapes that are kind of going to be coming down and around it. Again, never mind a good dribble. We like a good dribble in this lark, because it gives us something to play with, something to go on. As when we do this one, this is going to be all part of the opening. The idea I want to get to is the feeling that these are kind of, that the blue is separating or sort of being torn apart or opened up, and the red section is kind of inside. So very simple, just any, I mean, you know, I'm going to slightly point them top and bottom to get this kind of leaf form, but you could have any kind of shape just sort of breaking through on this side. It's to give us different areas of form. And so much of, as what I say, so much of doodling is about creating areas and like almost worlds within worlds, that so that we're breaking up this white surface and preventing us from being concerned about where to start by giving us something that we have to work with. This is why we don't mind things happening by chance, because it's an opportunity. Chance is an opportunity for there to be a texture that we couldn't have predicted. And that's always a really exciting bit. So again, where you get this sort of lovely moment here where you're crossing from a dry surface onto a white, you get this beautiful fuzz on one side, then a more controlled edge on that side. And again, it just gives you different things to play with. And we've got some sort of composition in that we have these on one side and this on the other. But we might just take, I think, just bring these across a little bit over this and see how they can interact together later on. So we've got 5 of these sort of leaf shapes. And I think if we then take our blue color and we're going to put a blue leaf shape in a space where we've got room for a blue leaf shape, so that this area here, the background is going to go red. So if I put a blue shape in here just to kind of echo what's happening with the red shapes, just the one, but just to do something a bit different. Okay, so those are my, so I've got my sort of 5 red leaves and a 6th blue one, and now I want to work in the background around these ones. So I haven't put too much water on this background because I want to maybe be a bit more controlled and decided where I put this sort of blue, but I'm coming with this sort of tealy blue, turquoisey tealy kind of color. I'm working in between these shapes, so they're going to be in this sort of blue background. And there's no reason here why we can't add in, you can mix up different blends of teal. So as the background progresses, we get some areas that have more of one color than another into it, and sort of changing how that surface looks. So we just get a slightly different feel. I want to keep the edges between these shapes at the moment quite pure. I don't want to overpaint them or get them mixing up. If they get a fuzzing, I don't mind a fuzzing, but again, I want to sort of be definitely sure where my shape is. So I'm definitely painting around. And when you're doing watercolors, obviously it's very difficult to go over it again. So this is why, you know, on a different medium like acrylic, we might go in and do a huge blue backdrop, just a massive blue canvas, and then start working on top of that, because we can pile the paint on top and you can obscure what's underneath. Watercolor, it's much harder to do that because they're these sort of translucent colors. So I'm just going to put the foreground. So what we've done is to put the foreground elements in first and then take that background around here. Now we've got to think about how we cope with this rogue blue leaf that I've given us, just to kind of confuse things. So we could do quite a nice transition point here. So to transition from red to blue, the ideal color would be kind of a purple. So I'm going to mix up a little bit of purple using the sort of tealy turquoisey blue as a base, so that it's kind of matching it. And I'm going to start with, we'll see what colors we get. So I'm going to start with a little bit, this one is a lot of blue and a very small amount of red, just sort of on this side, but it's just to get a hint of that change coming between that sort of side and this. And then I'm going to add more red and more in, so that I'm starting to get more of a purple color from the other side. So we're getting something hopefully on this side that is, yeah, you can see it's got a definite kind of purple hue to it, purple in nature. kind of coming up, and we can blend some blue into that a bit further up, sort of coming around. So I've got some, so we're getting some, so we could almost just keep it into that bluey purple quite close up. But I think I'd like to take it into more of the red. So now I'm going to pile a lot more red into the purple paint that I've mixed up. So and you can sort of go back and go over the top of that blue and kind of get that blending in. So we're getting into more of a red-like color, moving towards, just carefully coming around that blue leaf shape. And then again, more red. Let's get more red going into that bit. And so we're coming right into a sort of red zone in the corner, blending that round, and then coming up round into that. So there we go. That's just got a hint of red into that corner, and it's not so red that it's going to blend into that other one, but I'm going to take it back now into blue, just by adding more blue back into that purple, so that I can make sure that as I come up sort of into this area here, we're getting some teal and some blue coming in. If it bleeds in and creates a fantastic drop like that, excellent. You know, let's encourage it to mix and to get all sorts of lovely swirls of color happening, because this is, I always think this is just so much fun, and it's lovely to be able to paint like this and not trying to do anything in particular. You know, we're not trying to draw a beach or a forest, or we're just saying, wow, look at that color, isn't that color amazing, this color reminds me of, and it's just lovely to be able to play with color in this kind of way and just see where the color wants to take you. And so up here I've got, let's get some more blue in here. And if I get some drips, I'm quite happy. Don't mind a few drips. We'd like to see, there we go, look, that's one broken across there. That's going to be fun to play with later. And this is really the attitude that you want to think when you're working with this, is there is never any such thing as a mistake in these kind of paintings. It's like, if something runs, if it spills, if it moves, it doesn't do what you think it does, just take a step back and say, this isn't what I wanted, but what have I got now? It may not be what I thought I wanted to do, but it's where I've ended up, and it might be even better than what I thought I was going to do if I just give it a moment to talk to me and to see where it's going. So I'm just filling in quite a big area of blue there. I think I want to add in a few splodges of green just to sort of break up that background and let those colors rain down and sort of blend together, because why not? Because why not, indeed. And then there's just like a tiny bit, this area down here for me has got more blue on it than it appears on your screen, because the light is just slightly whiting it out a bit. You can see if I just tilt the camera down a bit and draw the curtain, I hate to cut out the sunlight, but ridiculously I kind of have to. There is a lot more blue happening here, so I can just take in some of that sort of area there, and a little bit at the top, which is hard to see because my paper is just not the format that fits into the camera lens as ever. But I'm just going to take some last bits. Maybe I'll leave a tiny bit of white at the top. Sometimes you want to leave some paper showing. Sometimes it has this sense of lightness at the top. So just a very light wash, maybe not completely left, but just like a very delicate wash over that area. So we've got a bit more. If you want to have some lightness towards the top, it kind of gives them this feel of orientation, because usually light sources are coming from above us, so we associate lighter colors with the top half of things. So if that's the case, then I think I can look down at the bottom of this now and kind of say, I think a bit more darkness into the bottom would be good. So I can mix up some stronger blue tones with quite a lot of pine green in to give them hopefully a bit more welly, and just pushing the brush really onto the paper and letting those ripples happen, not really even brushing with the brush, just as I just sort of dabbing it and letting there's that sort of reservoir of paint on the brush kind of run down and give us something different to look at, give us something to explore later with a line work. So we are getting to the hairdryer point when I think it's probably going to be time to stop and give it a blast with a hairdryer. So does anybody want to chuck me any questions or anything before we have a 2-minute hair drying break, if everyone's quite happy with their piece where they are, or they want to ask me anything quickly, now is the moment to do so. But I think, let me just pull my camera back a bit so we can see all of it. And if we're happy with that, then I'm going to say grab the hair dryers and give it a good blast just to dry off the surface. And obviously, ideally, you could leave that to sit overnight and get really dry. And if you do get a bumpy paper, I've got quite a bumpy paper. If I had time, I'd put a dry iron over the back of it. Put it between two pieces of paper and iron it, and give it, and that'll really, with plenty of heat, but no steam, and that will help to kind of flatten my paper out. But if we're all happy there, I think I'm quite liking the way some of these edges are kind of blurring with these sort of red shapes now, and this sort of echoey blue shape has become quite taken into this sort of background. So I'm going to just mute for a couple of minutes, and I'm going to get my hairdryer, and which is, bless it, never gets used for drying hair anymore these days. I'm going to dry off our picture, and I'd like you to do the same if you feel you're ready at that point. Okay, I'll be back to you in a minute. Right, so I have hair dried after having a nasty moment where I turned around and the hairdryer was not where I thought it was, and I luckily managed to find it had not been put back when it had been borrowed. Having said it's never used for hair, clearly someone had broken the mold and used it for hair. Outrageous. I'm going to have to write on it, painting dryer, not hair dryer. Right, so I'm going to start with this. We're going to use some pen work now, so I want to start on our sort of circular thing here. What I like about the the textiles, the African textiles that we were looking at earlier, was this sort of really quite linear kind of radial lines coming out of this center. So I'd like to sort of bring that into this a bit more. So I don't know if I'm going to literally use a straight a ruler to kind of like very precisely measure it all, but I might use a ruler to kind of just give me an idea of where I'm working from. The first thing I want to do is define this center point with pen line around the lovely sort of like fuzzy area that we've got here. So I'm going to start with a 0.5 or 0.3 or 0.6, that sort of middle middle grade, I suppose, or sort of like middle zone of pens, not the smallest, not the biggest. So let's focus in on this sort of central circular design here. So I'm hoping that you've got a sort of central point you can build on. So I'm going to take, just again, take my line round the fuzzing and the spreading that the paint has given me, and just define that center by sort of claiming it with pen work and just bringing it all the way around. So I've got a center and I know where I'm working from. So I'm going to include this sort of blue dribble that's come across it. I don't mind about that. I'm going to have it so it's got this sort of two-tone kind of feel. And then I've got this central point that I'm going to keep unadorned at the moment, certainly any further than that. So I've just sort of defined my middle point. And then I'm going to use a straight edge or a ruler or something. You can use a bit of cardboard. You're not going to have to do any measurements, so it doesn't have to be an actual ruler. It can just be a piece of something that you know is straight. So I'm actually going to use this piece of acrylic that I've got here, so you can sort of see that I'm just using it as a ruler. I'm not going to draw straight through the middle. I'm going to imagine that my middle point is somewhere sort of roughly around there. I'm going to just take a line through, and I'm going to not draw through the middle. I'm going to stop it. So you might want to watch and then you'll see what I mean, probably better than me trying to explain. So I'm just taking a point from outside, bringing a line across and stopping it at that central point, and then bringing it out again, because they have these very strong sort of radial kind of feel. Once I've got that one in, which is quite handy because I can move it around, you can still just about see through it, even if you get an odd reflection of me. I'm going to then do like the north and south equivalent points sort of on this as well. So I can take it up as far as I want into that blue and then take it down again. And I want this sort of slightly geometric element to this, but I don't want it to be as geometric as the original source. So I've now got those sort of in place. Then we can do, I suppose, the sort of quarters in between that. I was grasping then for the appropriate compass points, but it'll be north, west, and north, northeast, and all those ones. And so that's, and I'm going to come through and do the northeast and the southwest lines too. And I'm quite happy to let them, with the bobbiness of the paper, I quite like it the way it sort of stops the lines from being completely solid and completely accurate. And you can keep going with your straight edge and just sort of divide and subdivide the spaces again in between. I'm not going to do like an entire clock face because I want to do some hand-drawn lines as well, because I quite like the combination of the two. But I'm going to go around one more time and go into the north, northeast, and north, south, west, and all those compass points that I get really confused with, but they are sort of there. It always reminds me of that Hitchcock film, North by Northwest, or North by Northeast, I think it is, with Cary Grant being chased by a crop dusting plane, and which is a fantastic film. And fantastically, at no point in the film is the title referenced, and there was no evidence in the film as to what the title's referring to. So it was just, I think he just chose it because it sounded like a cool title. So I'm going to bring those through, and then I'm going to do some hand-drawn lines again into sort of to add to the depth of this, but I'm not going to bring the hand-drawn lines up as far as the ruled lines I've got here. I'm going to swap to a different pen as well, so that I'm going to use a brush pen. If you haven't got a brush pen handy, then use a thicker kind of like 0.8 ink pen or that sort of thing. And I'm going to now sort of do these lines, but they're going to be just more in this red zone. So they're going to be coming from the edge of the red zone, coming out, and they can fade out. And you can sort of get the rhythm of these sort of lines fixing in alongside that, and I'm going to follow the straight line that I've got in there. And there are lots of ways of approaching this. You might find it easier to do dividing and subdividing. You might want to work around in sections. You might not want to do every single section. It might be quite nice to just do part of them. But I quite like occasionally bringing this sort of linear quality into some things that are quite soft and abstract. Here, I've just decided, well, I've got this blue cloud kind of on this side. I'm going to not let the lines go over top of that. I'm going to keep them onto the red zone. And so that's just going to give that a different sort of feel. The brush pen is slightly bleeding on this surface, and I really like that. I like the softness that kind of gives these lines. And you can decide, you might say, right, I'm only going to have lines actually on my red color areas, or I might decide to have them only on the blue. But you can create your own kind of rule base to work to. This area here, again, because I've got this nice blue here, so I'm going to not let the lines sort of transmit into that bit. I'm going to let them stop sort of there, and I can keep moving round. And where that line that I've originally drawn crosses the red zone, I'm going to fatten them up with my brush pen. And the harder you press with the brush pen, the thicker your line becomes, so it can be quite responsive. And this is a brush pen. I've mentioned it before. I think it's one of my favorites. It's by Pentel, and it's a refillable brush pen. So you get ink cartridges that go into it just like an old school ink pen, but it allows you to refill it, and so you get slightly less. I feel it's slightly less wasteful than the traditional fine liners or the throwaway fine liners, which sadly, once they come to the end of their life and dry up, it's quite some brands do refills, but most of them don't. So this is a really good pen because you can refill it. Although it is using a plastic cartridge, it's slightly less waste each time, which I think is an important thing to think about. So I'm just going to bring some of these sort of geometric lines. I think the angle that you're seeing mine as, it makes it like this bottom section is quite a lot bigger, but it's partially because I cannot get the camera to be front on to my piece. So I will send through a scan of this afterwards, so you can see this is actually a lot more even or symmetrical than this image might suggest. But I will put some photos up towards the end as well, so you can see how it looks in a scan or in a direct photograph. So I'm just going to bring these sort of lines through, and I'm quite liking the way this sort of feel this is sort of getting. It sort of increases its sort of slightly target-like quality, I think. And sometimes I decide to go off the blue because it's my world and I can do what I like. Another reason why doodle paintings are so awesome, because you can just, you are in control in this point in time. And we can just bring a few more lines through. Usually I find if I want to get a lot of lines in, I'll do some relatively far apart, kind of all the way over, and then decide if I want to go more lines. I can go back in between to blend and get more line work onto the surface. Also, when you've got those sort of bigger lines in, you can always go back in with a thinner pen in between, and that'll give you a slightly different feel. So let's show you what that's like. So I can take back to my 0.4 pen, and maybe in some zones just come in between, and you have a thinner line, and using the thinner grade of pen immediately gives you a lighter approach and a lighter touch, and it adds in the linear detail but gives it a bit more sort of dimension. So we can keep on adding what are really, really very simple lines. The lines themselves are not complicated to do, but it's just thinking about where you want to put them and how you want to apply them. And you might keep them into one area only. You might decide to keep them all around the bottom area. You might make these ones shorter. If you have a sort of decision behind where you're putting them, it doesn't have to be a complicated decision. It can just be, I'm going to put these lines here because on the red, or I'm going to always have a thin line in between a fatter one. I think what I might do as well with my brush pen is go back to these sort of first lines that we mapped out and just make them slightly heavier at the front, and then let them fade off into that drawn line, and that's quite a nice attractive kind of edge to do. And of course, you know, the more we work on this, the more line work we do, we might come back and decide to add pattern into these sort of quadrants as well that we've created. But I think just to get something going to begin with, I think it always has quite a dynamic feel when you use these sort of radiating patterns, because it very much draws the eye to the center, to wherever you're pointing your lines. It just sort of makes you want to look into that area. So it's a way of kind of controlling the viewer, not controlling in a nasty way of guiding the viewer. That's a nicer phrase, really, isn't it? Guiding the viewer to see different parts of your image and thinking about what you might put where, just to kind of get people to look at the different things that are happening. So we'll probably come back and do more on this, but I want to also look at these leaf shapes that we've got going here to sort of see how we can get them working how I want to get them in my head. So we're going to look at this one here, because I can hopefully get my camera nice and front onto that, and we can see, so that's here. So I want to kind of have this feeling that these are maybe like tears, or, sorry, I'm just fiddling with the camera again, there we go, rents, or things that are opening into, like, from one dimension to another. So this is our kind of blue dimension, and there's kind of this red sort of coming out of here. So I'm going to start by, again, as I often do, just defining the edge that I'm working to. So bringing round the shape that I've got here, following my line, deciding which side of the paint line I want to be on. So trickling that sort of shape down and round, and then bringing that down into that lovely drip. If you haven't got a drip, then obviously you'd stop it at the bottom of this shape. But as I've got this sort of drip coming down here, I can continue this all the way down. It'll go all the way down off the page, but I won't do all the way that when I'm focused on this top edge, because otherwise you won't really see what I'm doing. And then I'm just following that blue kind of coming in here. So I'm imagining this is like an edge. So to get this sort of edge effect, I want to put a pattern into this red area, but I'm going to pretend that the pattern is kind of disappearing off behind this surface, so that I can't, I won't be able to see it where this blue area comes in. You can see this other red shape in here. I can kind of work on this at the same time, because I can, this starts to become then sort of two holes in the fabric of time, and I can just define the edge on this one as well, so that I can see how they all work together. And then I'm going to put onto here a sort of like pattern that I want to work on. I was thinking about some of the patterns that that are in the sort of African, the Ghanaian fabrics that we've been looking at. So I'm going to do one that kind of fits into here, and then I'm going to sort of like, so at the moment this pattern's going to be kind of imposed on this background. It's not going to follow necessarily the dribble. So you can of course put any pattern that you're comfortable working on, but I quite like this one. So I'll show you how I draw it. You do a sort of curvy V shape like that. So it's sort of like more like a sort of cleavage shape rather than a sort of hard triangle. And then you put a curved top on it. So you've got almost like a sort of lotus flower shape sort of side on. And then you can put a little bit of curved line there to give that a little bit of definition. And then bring some radial lines coming down into that. And that has a kind of feel of like petals maybe, or sort of brush marks and that sort of thing. And then you can even put like a little triangle sort of zigzag through the top of it, bring that round sort of like, so it creates like a little shape. And then you can see the way you've got this curved line here, that can become the top line of another one. So I then put two curves in like that, and that sort of then fits together. So my bottom section would come kind of in here, and then maybe I can change, they don't have to be totally identical, they can have an elongated teardrop pattern coming into that one, and then some lines into their bottom pointy section like that to kind of give that a feel. And then of course this side here, this becomes the top of another one that is now poking out from beneath that blue section. So I would just see lines disappearing off under that blue kind of I wanted to say archipelago, but that's the wrong word really, but that blue kind of bridge. And I'm just going to put some circles into the top of that to give it a bit of definition against that edge. And you can see that here that I get left with a little thin triangle, and that becomes the bottom cone of another one. So that would come up round there. And if they don't fit in perfectly, it doesn't really matter, because you can just put in some infill decoration that kind of makes it work for you, because it's not actually a perfect print. It's got this lovely soft quality to it. So I can bring another one sort of in there. And if I'm doing a pattern like this and I want to spread it across this whole bit, I probably work out roughly where all these are going first. So I wanted to get the detail into sort of so you could see how the pattern was going to end up. But I'm going to start now just putting in the kind of triangular shapes. And of course, you can use any pattern that you like using or that you've developed. Or you can just, from very simple lines, sort of diagonal lines, up to something more complicated. But I'm just going to sort of put these in. And if I get a shape that doesn't quite work, it really doesn't matter, because it's my pattern. So I can chuck in an unusual element. I'm not trying to get a perfect repeat. So I'll show you what I mean. If I get a piece here where maybe I'm not sure what's going on, I'll just change the shape I'm putting in. So instead of putting the triangular shape, I'm going to make a four-sided shape, a bit more sort of like that. And that will still give me something really nice to play with. And then I got a round shape coming in there, another one of those shapes. But what I want is these shapes to then start appearing in this section as well, so that they come across just as if there was something peeping from behind. You've got a fabric print underneath these sort of holes, which is gleaming through like that. So we're going to take that round, and then as long as we try and get something that has a similar kind of feel, then the effect will work. You'll get this feeling that this is something passing underneath and moving across like that. So it's sort of building across that surface and coming up into here. You can just see it disappearing off into that side. So I'll do a little bit more down here, and then we'll have a look at some of the other sections, because we don't have to keep it the same, it can vary. And then hopefully what I want to do is, by the time I get all this sort of filled in, let's do a few more, I'm going to add in a little bit of shading work as well to try and help give this feeling that you've got one surface passing under another. And like all these tutorials, I don't really expect them, we never really do stuff that gets done in this exact amount of time, because our ideas are always a bit more ambitious than that. But what is nice about them is once you've kind of got the painting bit done, which is the sort of wet and squishy bit, you can get these into a more kind of everyday position, like, on a work surface on your lap or something. So you can come back to these over a week and just do a little bit of relaxation by adding in the sort of pattern work. So it's creating the background for yourself that you can go away and explore later. Because of course, once you've got all the black line work in, you might decide to go in with some colours, some pens, some metallics, something different to add a highlight or something to these sort of areas. So let's bring these sort of lines up through here. So you can see it's actually a very simple base, but because you can make each little bit different, you can make it look a lot more complicated and a lot more intricate than it appears at first. So I can do another line in here for one of those bottom sections. If I wanted to, I can make that almost completely black with line work and shading and really darken it down so that it becomes, again, slightly different from all the other ones. Let's do one with some wiggly lines instead. There's loads of different ways you can decorate this pattern. It's a classic kind of interlocking lotus pattern. Again, and you can see in this, again, this connection between these Ghanaian West African patterns and the Northern African patterns used in Egyptian design, classic Egyptian design. The lotus flower was a continued motif they came back to for millennia, and you then see this motif reflected back and reworked in different cultural expressions right across Africa, and of course right into Europe as well, because of all these links in antiquity and beyond. And I think it's really nice to think that you know, it's quite possible that the people that read through these patterns didn't quite know what they were from, or weren't worried particularly about what they might symbolize for one group of people, but just really like them. And we're kind of doing the same thing in a way. And it's quite nice to think that they've rather stood the test of time, these lotus flowers, the passing of the years. So I've got this triangular shape in here. So I'm just going to do some very simple line work coming in across the top. So although it's a different shape, the lotus shape, it doesn't look too weirdly out of place. It's kind of all part of that kind of feel. So I'm starting to build, if I swing back a bit from here, you can see how that's starting to get the feeling that that there's two surfaces happening here, that you've got the pattern surface and this sort of more plain abstract surface. And then you can play with that. The blue one's going to slightly mess with people's minds because it's going to be blue instead of red, but it will still fit into that kind of idea. So particularly if I start doing a couple on this one here, and then you can see how it will really link across to the one that we've already done. So you can sort of see how that really starts to bring that illusion across. Now, again, I would usually spend time mapping all these out and all these sections and deciding what to want to do. I could change pattern. I could let it evolve as it went behind these different areas so that it wasn't doing the same thing. So that even if they're connected, they start to change, start to be something else. Those are all decisions we can make and play with sort of later on. But where I want to do is just where I've got some of these details, I'd like to get a little bit of shading in to try and increase that three-dimensional effect. So I'm going to zoom in a bit closer on this one here, hoping my camera will just about stay in focus at this distance. So I could use all sorts of things to get a more tonal effect on this, but I'm going to just use some very light work, some pen work, which is a sort of thing that, again, you build up over time. You could go in and use watercolor pencils and sort of get a shadow in, but if this was an actual 3D object and you had this lip here where it's sort of like something is torn and there's an underneath surface, it would cast a shadow. So if we imagine there's a distance between the blue surface and the red surface, it's going to cast a little bit of shadow. So you're going to get like a sort of line of shadow coming round that section there. So you can just very simply use some little, I'm using a fairly thin pen, and I'm just put some little tiny diagonal cross hatching marks. So they're going in the same direction and they're just little short lines, about 1 millimeter or so apart, kind of coming across. And I'm just going to go straight across my design as if it wasn't there, because I've got to imagine this is a shadow being cast on top of it. And that's going to start giving me an idea of shade and pushing this back into, recessing it into the sort of second layer behind. And I can start with that quite light shadow, and then I can always increase it a bit later. You're doing shade and toning things, it's quite good to start slowly and build up, because, you know, it's like the reverse of cutting your hair. You know, you can cut it off, but you can't put it back again. And it's similar with the shadow, you can add it in, but you can't take it away. So I put a tiny bit in first, and then once I've sort of, you know, quite happy with where it's going, I can maybe go back with a crosshatch and do it a bit more boldly. Do it more boldly, boldlier, I'll go but more boldly, whichever way one does that particular verb. And that just starts to give that a kind of darker edge to it, and it casts the shadow. And the bigger that you make your shadow, the more it reaches across your pattern area, the further away it makes your blue surface look, because the further a shadow casts, the more it sort of spreads out. So I'm going to darken all this edge in around here, and you could use watercolor pencils or extra paint in a very effective way to do the same kind of thing, and sort of build up that area of shadow into that, so it starts to hopefully give it a kind of more sort of textural feel. And then if you wanted to, you could add some shade into the pattern work, so it's not just a flat surface pattern, but we can start to give it a bit of a 3D quality. So I usually start by picking out some of the negative shapes and kind of giving them quite dark pen treatment to sort of make them look quite blackish, and then I want to think about then putting, if you're not sure what to do with the shadows, think about where you might put a highlight. And again, if you've got one of our famous white pens, that you can come in and add a little bit of highlight onto the blobs of the pattern. So this one needs a bit of a shake. Let's give it a quick shake and a wiggle. That's better. And see, I just put a little dot of highlight onto that part of the pattern, and it starts to bring it to life. And as it comes towards the edge, I reduce the amount of that because you would start getting a bit more shadow. So any pattern details in the middle of my shape, I want to put a lot more white on because they're going to be catching a lot of light and being quite high lit. And then as they come round off towards the sides, far less shading, far more shading and far less highlights. So again, oh come on, pen, he's obviously been stored the wrong way up. They like to be stored face down. I think he was stored the way up because the paint tends to run down away from the nib then. So highlight on here and follow the line work with the shadow, with the highlight, and it starts to you know, follow the shapes that you've got going on. Obviously I do, all these shapes will be drawn in, but I'm kind of skipping ahead so you can see where you might take it. That little bubble of shadow even on that, a highlight on that one, and that's hopefully starting to get those, to give them real sort of depth and getting them to pop out. With this edge here, I might even start adding some highlight around the edge, because if it was a tear, it would have a sort of rucked up feel. There'd be a split in the surface, and that would actually become a highlight area because it'd be slightly sort of raised up more. So I can add a bit of white around the area and help to see how that's now contrasting against that shadow and making the shadow that I put in a bit more sort of powerful, because again, you've got contrast, you're up in the contrast, you're getting more kind of effects. If I come back a bit with the camera, you can see how hopefully you can just see that starting to get this real sense of things translating underneath and sort of moving apart. So we've got this sort of real double surface going on. So again, if I add some highlight white lines into around this shape here, just following that torn shape that we've got, it's really making these two surfaces act differently and kind of pop in and out of the background. So I like this sense of these things passing underneath. And what will make it really strong is to really take those colors. So when I'm doing these flicks of white on here, when you start seeing them on this side as well, it really sort of brings them across and links them visually, and that sort of helps to add that kind of illusion of it moving across underneath. So let's come back from that, consider how we're looking. So we're getting this sort of quite nice surreal kind of feel with these two surfaces kind of working in and out and behind. So are we going to bring any of this? What we could do is bring some of this pattern into this sort of central area in our, what I'm calling our sort of target center here. So I think that'd be quite interesting to see how that works, and that'll bring this element across into this side of the composition. So I'm going to put some of the pattern into the circle. Now, luckily, because the circle is quite a long way away from this side, no one is going to be able to map exactly what part of the pattern should be appearing in this circle unless they really have far too much time on their hands. So as long as we're going to get a very similar kind of pattern happening, we can bring the same pattern into this area here, and imagine again that it's as if you're looking at it through a sort of piece of shattered glass almost, kind of here. So I can fit these lotus triangles in back and forth, interlocking them together. And as I said, if you find a bit where you're not sure what the pattern's doing, just improvise and add some other kind of bits in. And as long as you use similar kind of infill work on it to make it happen, then it will be fine. So let's put another piece in here. That's it, sort of coming in under there. That's it, and we can then get all these ones. And remember, they're disappearing off underneath that edge. And I think because we've got a little bit of white on this edge, it kind of picks up on what we've been doing with the added white highlight really nicely. It works really well to kind of do that. And so there we go. So that's got those again sort of mapped out. So now we can get in and put the detailing in, and that will start to really link it to the shapes that are happening on the other side. And similar kind of way, let's do some of these points in dark so they become more obvious. And then we can put a shadow in underneath that edge. And that in the same way will give us that three-dimensional kind of effect. And I like to colour in when you get little moments of negative space, you can sort of colour them in as well. And that really helps to give these a sense of solidity and sort of tone. So I'm just going to put sort of basically get this middle bit section done, and then we'll have about a quarter of an hour. So if anybody wants to think about a particular area you'd like me to have a look at, maybe we could have a look at the blue one and see how we can change that area, or something, or a different part of it. Let me know and we'll focus on that bit before I send you off to continue with your own creation. So we'll just fill those sort of areas in there, and then they were starting to bring, you should be able to start to see the same, again, connections between these areas. So everything that is a circle behind becomes something connected to this area here. So by using the same basic pattern elements, it's visually linking them together. So we are getting people now to look and see this world behind a world. And by putting it in this area, I think where we've really drawn attention to it, it really sort of like helps to connect it to all the sides of the pattern and tells people that this is really what this is about, is this strange sort of underlayer of pattern going on beneath this surface. And I think this painty edge here really has the feeling of broken glass, this sort of shattered kind of look, which is really quite effective, I think. And just by defining it in black pen, really helps with that sort of feel. So now I've got those in, so let's put some white highlights in here. Along in the same sort of way, a little dot, and then drag it along and to bring some, and it really, I think, brings some light and life into these sort of patterns really quickly. It's quite fun to do and, you know, really engaging. I think it makes them pop and it really brings them to life. So it's just a little dot and then a flick down the pattern shape that you've created. So if it's a drop shape, it's a little dot and a flick down, a sort of drop shape. If it's a circle, just a little dot in the top of the circle, just to kind of make it that come to life. Let me just swing the camera a little bit because it has a very short field of focus, and hopefully that's slightly more in focus than it was a second ago. And again, keep them towards the middle. So the ones at the very edge where they're disappearing underneath that broken edge, we're not going to put a highlight on yet, because they're going to be more in shadow and darker. And again, we've got this bit of white paper showing here, so we can add some on the blue side, on the sort of broken side. I'm just going to flick some white lines again, radiating in that same sort of way, but that's just adding a touch of highlight and white light to that broken edge, and it starts to again give that more feeling as if this is slightly almost pushing up a little bit, again as if it's been broken from the inside. I think it's quite a nice feeling, the idea that, you know, something's broken and torn, and yet in becoming broken and torn, it's revealing something beautiful and unusual underneath. And I think that's quite a nice metaphor, isn't it? That, you know, what's that phrase? You know, it's through the cracks the light gets in. So, you know, we can't all have perfect lives and perfect experiences, but those experiences can reveal how strong we are underneath. There we go. Who knew we were doing an image about overcoming adversity, inspired by African fabrics and doodle art. Who knows where these things are going to take us. So, and where I've got that white paper there, I'm going to add some white pen work into that as well, to kind of on top of that white paper, to make the most use of it, because there it is and it's working really well for us. And then to show you what it would be like if you wanted to do like a pencil or a watercolor shadow rather than a pen shadow, I've just got I'm using a blue watercolor pencil. I'm not going to, I can activate it with water if I want to, but I'm going to just really use it as a pencil. And I'm using blue because that's my darker kind of color, the cooler tone. So by using the blue on top of a bit of red that's showing through, it acts like a shadowing element. And it's just going to come in. So I'm just adding a little bit of shadow along this sort of edge here, which hopefully will again enhance that feeling. Sorry, it's gone a bit. It's when using pencil, it makes my camera on its little sort of stalk wobble a bit. So let me just hold on to the camera so it's not quite so wobbly. But hopefully that again will give that sense of shadow and make that central piece sort of pop out a bit more. Yeah, so this is I'm enjoying this one. So has anyone got a particular area, if I swing the camera back, that they'd like me to have a look at and consider before we come to the end of the session? So we've got this sort of the blue leaf shape. We've got maybe some of the space in between the blue space. Are we going to leave that paint here? We're going to do something on top of that. What people like? Does anyone feel like jumping in and making a suggestion about what we might do?
I'm happy to look at the blue leaf.
Yeah, shall I have a look at the blue leaf over here then? So blue leaf section, right? So our options are is that we could just very easily carry the pattern on and just have a blue background pattern. But what I'd like to try and do is try and imagine that this pattern is sort of breaking through, so that there's actually, this is more of a hole than it immediately appears, and that the blue leaf is a kind of part of this blue surface. So I'm going to outline it again, but what I'm really doing, although it's sort of one of these sort of chicken egg situations, I'm drawing round the dividing point between the two colors. I'm really thinking of the red space more than I'm thinking about the blue space at the moment. So let's see if we can get this to work. So I'm going to draw around the first sort of part like here, but then I'm going to stop the line there because I'm not 100% sure how we're going to manage this. But what I want is to kind of get the pattern to be here, but then to sort of fade out. So I'm going to start by doing a bit of pattern. And again, if I draw this edge in here, I know I definitely want a bit of pattern that's going to come behind this blue dribble, because otherwise that's how we're going to locate it and make it look like it's sort of behind. So, and this edge here I can see, so I've got a definite space down here, which I know is sort of red, as it were. And then we'll see, so I'm going to put some pattern in here first, and then we'll see what happens to it when it hits this side of the kind of faded out area here. So let's put some of this, my triangular lotus pattern in, and bring those sort of shapes across like that. And then as it hints to the purple zone, or it hits the purple zone, just get a few more in so I can, and then we'll just put their tails in so I know where I am. I think what I'm going to try doing is swapping first of all to a lighter grade of pen, or thinner grade of pen. So I can start doing it up here where I bring that sort of point in there. And then I'm going to put, just put its boundary in, there we go. And then I'm going to take, go down to a 0.0 pen, a 0.5 pen, and draw that in so that it's there, but hopefully it's looking fainter. And same with this pattern here. So hopefully we're getting a transition between solid line and into less solid line. Bring that one sort of coming across like that, and a similar kind of pattern that needs to be done. And then I'm going to maybe even swap to a lead pencil, which you just say that and you didn't know you were going to do this, and so lead pencils are immediately all hiding from you, laughing no doubt. Come on, I know there's one here somewhere. Oh, there's one below my worktop. I know where there's one for definite. Right, okay, so just ordinary lead pencil, and then just start to hint at there being some of that pattern, but let it mist out into that kind of blue zone. So you've got a slightly different transition because it becomes very sort of light, and then we can hint at some of those shapes still being air, but they're just going to run out in pencil, so they're quite light, so they're sort of disappearing off into the distance, into that kind of blueness. And then as we come back into thin pen ones, they're going to have their patterns in. That's the wrong pen, that's a fat pen. Thin pen, you know, just sort of looping in round like that, so it's all part of it. But by using the finer pens, we just naturally get a thinner, more kind of misty look, because it's only just about there, just about registering. I might add a tiny little bit of pen to those really faint pencil ones, but just sort of let them disappear off and bring these round. So, and then as we come back across, you can see how they're quite fading, they're fading into this reality. And as we get across into the more kind of red zone, then we go back into our pen and they become stronger, back into our thicker pen, and they become a stronger line with more definition. And obviously eventually I would hope to get all of this corner filled in with this pattern, so that it's sort of like fading in and out of existence. And it's not as difficult as it might hopefully look when it's finished, because you just control the amount of image you see by the size of pen that you use and the kind of media you use. So by using different sizes together, you can get this fading in and fading out effect. And you could do, if you had the dedication to do this sort of thing, you could do a whole page of just doodle pattern. Again, quite a simple repeated pattern, but you could just vary the pen you used across the page, from the sort of thick marker pen right down to the 0.5 tiny pen, and back in and out again. And this would really give you this lovely fading in and out kind of quality to your drawing, which I think would be really effective. And you know, if I ever have time when I'm not doing a million other things as well, I'm going to add that, I think, to my projects I really would like to get time to do list, which is an ever-growing list, and at least means that I will never run out of ideas, even if I never get them all finished. So that's the way I look at it, to be positive, you know, the ones that I'm going to save for my retirement when I'm, you know, 85, that sort of time. But I'd really like to do that, I think, thinking about it. I'd like to sort of do this and continue these sort of fading in and out kind of effect. So there's just very, and I liking that. Obviously I want to put more stronger pattern on this side, but liking this rather a lot, more than I thought I was going to, or at least it seemed to have worked how I wanted it to, which is always satisfying. Where I've got this sort of purpley zone in here, I'm quite tempted to just do some little whispery kind of whiffs of pattern ghosting in and out, so that you've got the feeling that this is like a transparency. And some points it's torn, and some points it's just floating in and out of existence. So I can sort of play with my two surfaces. And there we go. Let's just put some sort of pattern shapes in there, and I can get another little one just sort of, I haven't got to do it all, I can just do a little hint of it kind of dematerializing and fading in and out of existence, sort of. And I can just sort of stop it, and you can see that just gives it a little sort of, again, hint that there's something happening under the surface. I can take it a little bit more, another one just sort of in there. And then let's think about the white pen element. I just feel like I want to put some rounds into that as well. I just love rounds. So again, on the darker bit of pattern around here, this is when we can obviously put our usual quite strong highlights, just to give those, to continue that continuity between the sort of areas, and sort of bring that round into here. And then when we get to these sort of the fading zone, the twilight zone, I feel like I want to call it. So these ones here are still quite strong, and then as we get to here, we can just reduce the size, so we just get little tiny hints of white as part of the overall kind of disappearing quality. And we can just hint at them. And it's funny how even on the really faint ones, you would still see, so almost the first thing that you see is a little bit of light. So it's quite good just to add those little moments of light onto it, to kind of, because that's kind of as it breaks through the mist, almost the first thing your eye is going to see is that little moment of highlight where it appears in this dimension. So again, where I've got just these little hinty ones up here, I can just put in little moments of light like that, so you can just see that pattern fading in and out. And like in this area here, on this one here, you've got a very strong edge you can work your pattern up to, and then I think it's going to be really cool to then have it fading off into this section, so it's much more sort of faded and soft. And I think this sort of ghosting effect that we're achieving down here, I'm really pleased with that. I wasn't expecting, you know, I didn't know where we were going to go with that, and I'm really pleased we've gone there, but I think it works really nicely. And then again with this edge here, I think I'd then define this edge again as a bit more strongly. And then can you see where we've got this little ghosty pattern kind of just overlapping? As soon as that appears on this red zone, that can then be drawn in the stronger pen. So that pattern is definitely there. And then it hits that hard blue edge and disappears. So I can work that blue edge in again. So you can see how hopefully that little hint of pattern is, when it comes into that red zone, becomes much stronger, because we can actually see it sort of fully exposed at this point. So there's going to be all pattern work kind of coming here under this red bit and sort of blending into that section. And if I do another one kind of coming here, and then I can go back, because this is still slightly transparent on this side in our sort of world. So I can get my thin pen and continue that pattern shape across. So I just continue that line, but do it in faint pen. And that will give us, again, that, and you can do a little hint of it on this side. Just continue those lines across, and it will hopefully give that feeling that your pattern is a bit more translucent and just showing through, and it becomes looking like sort of areas of mist and sort of like smoked glass and that kind of effect. And it's quite a good thing to think about if you were doing a more naturalistic painting. If you wanted to get the impression of things behind glass or reflections, just by changing the size and the type of the media that you use, it can really help to enhance that kind of effect and give it that sort of dual surface quality. And in a way, it sort of helps you to get those in place and helps the subtlety of your sort of drawings. So I think this is working quite nicely. What does everyone else think? What do you think about this as an idea? Is it something you think working for you?
I like it, but I haven't got one of them white pens, so I tried to do it with some Chinese white. It doesn't work as well.
No, I think the white pens are a really good investment, actually. I think once, if you can get yourself a couple, luckily these acrylic ones are cheap as chips, as they say in the trade. You know, they're usually only like a couple of quid for a pack of 4, you know, so, and they go on, draw on everything. So they're great for that. You can do all of this, you know, they'll work on any surface, they'll work on glass, they'll work on stone, they'll work on ceramic, you know, so you can do a lot with them. So I think they're a really good investment. even more so than perhaps more kind of, you know, grown up posh stuff, more official art stuff, you know what I mean? Because they're always sold for kids and for drawing on pebbles and stuff, and they're absolutely ace. And they're really good because they go on all these surfaces. They'll work on all these like paint, I mean, they'll work on a canvas really well, and they just give you that extra definition and control compared to using a brush, you know, where you can use a pen and you can have more sort of control over what you're doing. And there we go. So we're pretty much going to have to call it a day at this point, but I'm envisaging that obviously
Sophie, I've sent a question via chat. Do you want to just answer it via chat?
Yes, certainly.
Just so that the boxes get ticked.
Are we going? Yes, yeah, okay, I will certainly do that. But there we go. So I'm hoping that's given you, let's bring the camera back so you can kind of see how it's all looking. But I'm hoping that what you're seeing is this kind of moving in and out of surface of layers, and seeing how they're sort of like moving from one surface to another, and you're getting a sort of ghosting image, you're getting these sort of bits showing through. And if you can continue to do the pattern behind all the red areas, and then you might decide to bring some more of this ghosting technique into these sort of double layers and maybe up into this white zone. So we're getting something with loads of interest, and that sort of like people almost want to go and reach out the finger and sort of touch, you know. So there we go. I'm just answering the question quickly.
You did anyway. You did. You did the stalk. Yeah. I mean, it was only literally as I'd sent that question, you'd sort of started doing the stalk anyway. There
we go. So yeah, so I've just put, you know, think of them again that in this context, they're going to be more like sort of tears rather than stalks. So they're kind of holes going in rather than things sticking out. But there we go. So I will stop the recording now. Oh yes, there we go.